Thank you for coming to our presentation today, and thank you to the impressive group of women at the Heritage Education Network for putting this conference together. I will briefly introduce myself and give some background on pottery production in Belize. Then Mr. Frank Tzib will present most of our talk today. My name is Dr. Jill Jordan, and I've been working as an archaeologist in Belize since 2005 when I was a field school student. I'm an archaeologist interested in pottery production to understand how the ancient Maya interacted with one another and with their landscape. I have worked in the Cayo, Stan Creek, and Toledo districts of Belize, so I've studied how pottery was produced across much of the country. Our presentation today focuses on how our research on the ancient Maya, and particularly the Maya living in Stan Creek, is informed by both archaeology and modern production practice. Pottery was produced as early as 1200 BC in Belize and is associated with the earliest permanent settled communities. Ceramic vessels were used to store, cook, and prepare food and drink until around the 1900s when these tools were replaced with metal and plastic containers. We have some information on historic pottery production based on written reports, but for the majority of the Maya occupation in Belize, we must study the pottery itself to understand how it was made. Pottery is the most common artifact found on archaeological sites in Belize. At its most basic, pottery is composed of clay and water that is fired to create a durable container. It is most often encountered as sherds, which are broken pieces of whole ceramic vessels. Ancient Maya pottery comes in a variety of shapes, colors, and sizes. There are two primary ways that archaeologists study pottery. We study how the pottery looks, called stylistic analysis, and we study how the pottery was made, called technological analysis. Both types of analysis provide important information about the ancient Maya. Stylistic analysis focuses on how a vessel looks and examines features like color, the painted decoration, and the overall form of the vessel. So, for example, is the vessel used as a plate for serving food or a jar for serving water? This slide shows a plain jar on the left and the elaborately painted com vessel from Baking Pot on the right. Studies focused on technology examine the clay portion of the vessel and is often used to determine where and how a pot was made. For example, Belize can be divided into broad geologic zones: limestone to the north, granite in the Maya Mountains, and sandstone in the Toledo district. Pottery made out of these different raw materials looks different and can be used to determine where a pot was produced and can provide information on long-distance trade. Now I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Frank Tzib to introduce himself and complete our presentation.
My name is Frank Tzib. I am from the beautiful village of Oshimulka, place of the Three Hills, now known as San Antonio in the Cayo district. So I was always interested about how those beautiful pottery vessels found on Maya sites and even on my own backyard were made, and the process required to create such a masterpiece out of raw earth or clay. I would look in awe at the pieces found in ancient Maya sites. As a Yucatec Maya, I believe that pottery plays a big role in the identity of our culture as a whole. Pottery production has been practiced for thousands of years by our people, from commoners to royal people. Therefore, knowing the history of tradition in our culture and seeing how it is slowly dying with time is what drives me to learn, practice, and share this beautiful tradition to others. I love studying pottery because in this way, I can help to continue this tradition for future generations. Not to mention how much fun it is to work and develop your artistic skills while you do it. So it all started when my grandfather mentioned to me that he knew a bit of the process because he saw his mom working with it when he was small. The name of the clay type used for making pottery is he, according to my grandfather. My great grandmother had to walk 8 miles in order to find the good clay, which is the he, and bring it back home. With a smile on his face, grandfather mentioned that it was always fun for him to work with clay because he was the one who got to knead the clay by jumping on it for hours until the clay is well kneaded and mixed with sand and water. My great grandmother would store her kneaded clay on a rubber and further use it afterwards. When she's ready, she would take a portion of the clay enough to make a pot and knead it again. To take all the air out of the clay, she would roll out these long worms of clay and start to coil them as if it was Ferdinand snake resting under the trees, grandfather said, trying to be funny. The other method great-grandmother practiced was by using a mold made out of wood in the shape of the pot she desired to make, and would wrap it with clay and play with it, grandfather said. When the clay pot is ready, she would let it dry for some time, which my grandmother is not sure how much time. Right after the pot is dry enough, she would fire it on her fire hearth. You would know when it is ready, because it will turn in a red color, like the coals around it, grandfather added. I would sit and eagerly hear these stories from my grandfather the whole day and just wish I could learn more and start to put it into practice. It was until one day I received a call from Miss Timotea Mesh, the president of the San Antonio Women's Cooperative. She asked me if I am willing to help out with the painting of their pottery vessels and that they would teach me. My first day I was given an introduction to pottery and I got to feel what that clay grandfather always mentioned felt like. Rafael Canto patiently taught me all he knew and would always be a motivation for me because he always believed in my potential to learn. I met Dr. Jill in 2018 when we both worked with the SCRAP, the Stand Creek Regional Archaeology Project, directed by Dr. Megan Paramaki Brown and Dr. Sean Morton. We work at the site of Alabama, located near the modern-day village of Mayamopan in the Stand Creek District. Since 2008, we have been working to understand pottery production at late to terminal classic Alabama. We're interested in two primary questions. How was the pottery made, and where did potters get the raw material to make their pottery? These questions will allow us to understand local pottery production at the site of Alabama, as well as interactions between Alabama and other parts of the ancient world. The basis pottery production process is similar in many parts of the world. Potters first need to collect their raw materials. These raw materials are often processed. The vessel is formed into the desired shape, then decorated and fired. Not all these steps are required for every ceramic vessel, and the raw material used in pottery production and the way that potters process, form, decorate, and fire pottery differs even within the Maya region. Clay is abundant on the landscape. Anyone who walks around in Belize after a rain and has to remove sticky dirt from their shoes know this very well. But what is it? Clay are sediments that formed by the weathering of rocks. Dry clay looks like a powder, seen in the lower right image. But when water is added to the clay, the particles stick to one another and can also slide by one another, providing a material that can be shaped into different forms when wet. The best clay for making pottery are found on riverbanks or by streams. This is because clay is impermeable, and when water is running, it will wash sediments of soil and rocks, leaving pure clay on site. To collect clay, it is good to dig roughly 3 to 4 feet underground to obtain the best clay. To know which clay to use, you have to wet the clay first and knead it and roll them out like little worms and bend them. The more you can bend them, the clay would be better. Archaeologists think of raw material in terms of their technical properties, composition, and location on the landscape. Worldwide, most potters collect their raw materials from near their homes. When archaeologists sample clay, we most often sample a variety of different places across the landscape near to the site where we are working. We will then analyze attributes like colors, textures, and type of rocks and mineral inclusions. Although archaeologists know how to identify clay by making a little worm, most of us are not knowledgeable enough to know if a clay we sample is good or bad for making pottery. Not all clays are ideal for making pots, and their natural state, so potters will add materials, what archaeologists call temper, to the clay to improve its quality. The added materials serve as a variety of purpose to make the clay more workable and suitable for pottery production. The most common tempers used in Belize are crushed rocks and sand, but potters also use grog and jute shells. Potters may have added temper to increase the strength of the clay, to decrease the stickiness, and to reduce the shrinkage in the drying process. Clay itself is strong when fired, but to make it more consistent, we need to add sand. Depending on the method one is using to create pieces and the type of usage of the pot will determine the kind of sand to mix clay with. Coarse sand will be used for bigger pots to make it stronger for it to hold more weight. Fine sand is used for smaller pots or drinking vessels because it is easier to close the pores of the clay and hold water. While doing the research with Dr. Jill Jordan, I learned that in ancient times, or even in other Maya communities, Mayas would use burnt jute to mix with their clay or even ashes of pumice rocks. Archaeologists think about temper in much the same way we think about clays. We sample a variety of different rocks and sand from near an archaeological site to compare to the pottery. The type of temper can also provide important information on where a ceramic vessel was produced. For example, Alabama is surrounded by granite, and there is no limestone near the site. So, if we notice that a ceramic vessel is tempered with limestone at Alabama, we know that the pottery was produced somewhere far away from the site. The Stand Creek Regional Archaeology Project brings together people with different specialties. Ms. Aurora Saki also helped us understand how the ancient Maya pottery was made. Here you see me and Ms. Aurora making pottery using clay and sand from the Stand Creek district. The archaeologists have taught me a lot. At first, I thought that potters only added sand to clay to make it more consistent and better for making pottery. Working with archaeologists, I learned that other Maya communities in Belize would add crushed jute and that the ancient Maya would also use a variety of different kinds of temper including sand, limestone, shell, crushed rock, and volcanic ash. Working with archaeologists have helped me broaden my view on pottery as in the different types of variety that archaeologists use to date on archaeological sites. I also learned that provenience, or where a pot was made, can be determined based on the type of clay present in pottery shard. It also helped me to have an idea of how archaeologists gather data to understand provenience. Miss Aurora and I have also taught the archaeologists a lot about how to make pottery. One afternoon, we fired a bunch of pottery that Miss Aurora made in her kitchen hearth in Maya Center. We collected different kinds of fuel including corn cobs and fired the vessel until they were red. We then took them out of the fire to see how they looked. Archaeologists rarely participate in the entire production process, and this helped them to think different about ancient Maya activities. Most ceramic analysis in the Maya region depends almost entirely on describing what a vessel looks like. The pottery pieces we find at Alabama are primarily body shards without any feature that tell us the form of the vessel, example if it is a jar or a bowl, or decoration to provide clues about where it was produced. We decided to analyze paste characteristics, so the clay and temper component, because these attributes can be analyzed on poorly preserved shards. Our focus on paste characteristics and how the pottery was produced require knowledge not only about archaeology but how to make pottery and where to find the resources on the landscape. A group of archaeologists, traditional knowledge specialists, and potters work together to understand pottery production at Alabama. We determined that two groups of potters likely lived at late classic Alabama. We used different raw materials and produced different vessels formed. Our approach with Megan and Jill contributing our archaeology and material science, knowledge of Miss Aurora and Silvestro approaching the research from the standpoint of contemporary practice, we have a much better understanding of the Alabama pottery than any of us could achieve on our own. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we look forward to your questions after the session. A special thank you for Rebecca Friedel for recording this lecture so that we would prepare this presentation from both Belize and the United States.